Hello everyone and welcome to the Complete Python Programming course. In this video, we'll talk about modules in Python. This video is part of the beginner tutorial. As your program grows bigger, you will have much more lines of code. Having all your code in one file will make it very hard to work with. Imagine having a Python file with 100,000 lines of code. Even opening your file with your text editor will become a pain. By using modules, you can split your code into smaller sections and store each section in a different file. A module is a file containing Python code that you can import into other Python files and use its contents in the file you imported it into. Let's get started. Before we talk about modules, let's talk about something that you often see. When you open any Python program, if you tried that, you would see that you have statements like if underscore underscore name underscore underscore equals equals and two underscores main and two underscores. And then after that, it calls functions or it does something. So let me print name and see what is this name about. Let's run our code. Python 3 main.py. Notice that my file name is main and it was always main.py in this course. This is just accidental. So let me run that and see what happens. And Python printed main. Let's take this one step further. I'll bring up my file manager and create another file. Let's call it hello.py. hello.py, and that's a Python file. Let's open that with my file editor, and this is my hello.py file. In this file, I'm going to go and write the same. If underscore underscore name underscore underscore equals main, print name. Let's run this one. Python 3 hello.py. And it also printed main. So the word main, where it came from, we didn't define it in any of these files. When we run a program from the terminal, as we say, we run it as a script, Python assign a name to our file, and this file is a name underscore underscore name underscore underscore. When you run your file from the terminal, this value will always be main. For any file you run, it will be main. Notice that for main it's the same, and for hello it's the same. Main is the main program you are running. Now let's take this one step further and introduce modules. Python differs from languages like PHP, where you have everything available, all functions are available. You need to import functionality into your Python programs. The modules are in the standard library of Python, but you need to import them to access their functionality, unlike languages like PHP. You import them using the import statement. Let's take an example and see how that works. To work with JSON in Python, you need to import JSON to use its functionality. How you do that? The import syntax is import and the package name, JSON. You need to know the package name to be able to import it, or the module name to be able to import the module. In this case, it's JSON. Import space the module name. You will get used to the names after some times, but for now, that's the syntax. Let's take an example of how we define our own modules now. These are modules available by Python, and your own modules will function exactly the same, except that they are written by you instead of having them available by the language provided by Python. In my file manager, I will create two text documents. The first one, rename. I'll call it functions.py. You can call it whatever you want. The other one, I will call it rename, and let me call it config.py. I will open this in my file manager. And here are my two empty new documents, functions and config. In my config file, I will add greeting equals good morning. And I will add params equals, let's make it look like a real params that connects to a database. Host and port. Notice that this is a dictionary, and the first one is just a string variable, and I will go back to my main file. To import this, it's in the same directory as my main file. This is my main file, and I have config in the same directory. Let's see how I can import that. Import config without .py, just the name of the file. My file name is config.py, and I import it using config. To access its value, but before accessing its value, let me show something else. I'm printing name from my main file. I'll print another one, print config dot underscore underscore name. Notice that my config file has no value called name or underscore underscore name, but I am calling it here. And notice my editor even changed its color. Let's run our main file and see what prints. Clear, and we run our main, and it printed underscore underscore main, which is my main file, and config, just the name of the modules. It didn't change it to a main. This is what we talked about. When you run your script, when you run your program as a script from the terminal, Python change its name into main. Otherwise, the name is just the module name, which is the file name. Let's move forward. Let's remove all these. And config now is imported to my file, and I can access all its values. In config, I have greeting and I have params, and it will be available for me here. Greeting, and let's print also params. Let's run that, and Python returned them correctly. What you need to know here is that once you import a module, you have all its variables available to you. Notice that I imported config. There is another thing I can do. I can use the import from config import greeting. Let's try to run that and see what happens. And Python returned an error. Print config greeting is not defined. Config is not defined because I imported only greeting from config. We can access that just going by greeting. In this case, we are making the variable greeting available to us in our file. And you can do the same for params. Now let's remove params for now, and let's print greeting, which should print it to the screen correctly. Let's try with params, and let's run that, and we will get an error because we didn't import params. We can import it using the command. Notice that this is very useful when you have a very large file that contains many functions and you want to import just a specific set of them or one variable from a large file. This is very useful instead of importing the entire file into your program. Let's go to functions and define 4 functions. Def add a and b, and let's make it return a plus b. PHP. This is not about functions, so I will just copy that and add them as for functions. Divide, and that will divide, and that will multiply, and that multiplication, and that subtraction, and let's subtract. The exact same, notice that function is also in my directory, the same as config and functions. In functions, I defined 4 functions, and let me here go and try to import something from it. Import functions. You can access functions from your file the same as you accessed variables. So let's comment these for now, and let's try with functions. Print functions, add 10 and 20, and let's see what that returns. Print that, and it returned 30. The function add is available to me as all other functions in my functions file. If you use subtract, it's also available to you. Subtract and 20 and 5, that will also return the correct value. You also can use from functions, import, add, and subtract. And you can use them just directly in your code this way because they are available to you without importing the multiply and divide. And that will just run exactly the same as the previous example. To cover this correctly, we have to cover something here. We have something called from functions import all. The star refers to all. Let's try to run that and see what it returns. Clear, and run our code, and it imported everything from functions. I highly advise against that because the name collision, and you might have something defined somewhere else, and importing it that way will make it just collide with other names and you will have problems. If you want to import something, import it this way and use functions.add. That's the best way, in my opinion. There is another thing you can do. Import. Let's go back to the greeting to make it easier. Greeting, you can use from greeting, import greeting as a. The variable greeting will be imported, but it will be a. If you try to access a greeting, it will return an error. You cannot import that because it's not defined. If you refer to it as a and run it, it will run correctly because you are importing something, importing a variable and renaming it to a in this context. There is another thing you can do, import config as conf or as x. Now in this case you have x and dot greeting. I hope this is clear. This is just straightforward. Import config. No, it's import. Sorry about that. Import, not from. And it will return correctly. This is the import statements, and that's the way you use them. Now let's try to take this one step further to cover all the basics. I'll go back to my file manager and I will create something here. I will call it directory. I will call it people. And create a directory. Inside my directory, I will create a file. I'll call it friends.py. And we'll create another document and call it coworkers. .py. Notice that I have a directory inside my Python program, Python directory where I run my program, and I have inside it two files. One is called coworker and the other one is called friends. Let's see how we can use that. Let me open these two in my editor. These are my two new files. Let's go back to the main. Let's remove the config and all that because we saw how it works. And let's remove all that. And inside the friends, let's just have a list of friends and let's call it L. And these are James and Lisa. Just a list. And let's go to coworkers and create L. And in the coworkers, let's call it boss1 and boss2. Now notice that these are not in the same directory. How do we import something from a different directory? Python is very flexible in that. From people, import friends, and from people, import coworkers. Now, notice that I imported friends. Let's see how we can access that. I have friends available for me. Let's try to see what we can do with the friends. Print friends have a variable called L. Let's try to print that. Print friends L, and let's try to print also L from the coworkers. Coworkers. Let's run that. Clear. And run our code. And it did actually access James and Lisa. In this case, and then it accessed both boss1 and boss2. In this case, people is referred to as a package. A package is a way you group your modules in a tree-like configuration. Let's see one more example how it goes. We can ask Python from people, friends, import. We have just one value, L, and we have from people, co-workers, import L as well. Now this will be confusing. If we print L, which one will Python print? Let's try that. And Python printed just the second L because it overridden it. Let's try to fix that. As friends list and as co-workers list. This way we can access it as friends list and it will print it, and we can access the second one as co-workers list. Let's print that, and it ran correctly. With all these examples, notice that from people.friends directories, you can enter directories to import something from them using the dot in Python. And you can even go further than that. You can create as many nested directories as you want, and you can access them this way. This goes how Python search the directory tree and how it accesses. This is a beginner tutorial. We needed the imports because we will import some packages to work with, but we don't want to go deep. In the intermediate level, we'll talk about how it's actually done internally. But for now, this is a simple introduction to the import system. And in most cases, you just need to import a package and work with it as simple as that. Let me give some more examples of this just to make sure that everything is clear. From people, import friends. Now let's print friends and see what's that. Print friends. And let's run our code and see what friends print. And it printed module people from the location that I have it stored at. Now let's take that one more step and let's see name as we saw in the other example. Print the current name, which should return main, and let's see the name of friends. And notice that the name of friends will return people.friends. It's inside people friends. It's different than what we saw with config. From or import config. And let's print the name in config here in the middle and config. I hope I'm not typing too fast, but you can pause the video. It's just not to waste anybody's time. Clear. And let's see what we have in here. Notice that config is called config and people, it returned you the entire tree or like the folder structure, directory structure of what you are doing. People and friends after that. One more thing I would like to show is a function in Python called directory. Let's stay with config for now and let's print dir config. Let's get rid of that. Let's see what directory print directory config would return. Run our code and notice that it returned built-ins, cached, doc, file, loader, name, package, space, greeting, and params. It has all these in it. We didn't talk about object-oriented lists yet. Everything in Python is an object, so we will discuss these in much more details when we talk about objects and after we introduce the object-oriented. But generally, you can see that it has greeting and it has params, which is the two things that we identify, the two variables we identify or we defined in our config file. The other things are not defined, and all of them has two underscores before the name and two underscores after the name. Notice that it also has the name that we accessed, and you can at home try to access these and see what they print, and just to have a look at it. We will talk about it in much more details in the future. Let's just cover a few more things. You can do this way, import functions. You can separate what you want to import with a comma. Python doesn't like that, but you can just, let's do that. Let's print also here for functions. Functions, we have here functions. You can separate what you want to import with a comma, and Python will import them without a problem. Notice that my functions file has subtract, multiply, divide, and add, and it has the other built-in methods, let's call them, or methods we didn't define, or underscore method, let's call them double underscore method for now until we reach and we talked about them. I wouldn't recommend doing that. To make it much more readable, just use a new line, import functions. That makes it much easier, and always put your import at the top. You see code sometimes and people think that they can put the import statement inside an if statement because they think that will speed their program or something. It wouldn't. No. In most cases, actually, it just wouldn't. Just put your import at the top of the file. It helps the reader to see what you are importing in your file. We don't want to spend too much time talking about this at this stage, but try to remember that what we talked about, the name, the import syntax and all that, because we'll be using them. You will get used to them by the way we are typing them. You will see that we will be importing things all the time in our course. If you need to ask any questions, just leave a comment and I will try to get to them as soon as possible. Meanwhile, practice and try to replicate everything we did here by yourself. If you like this video, support the channel by subscribing. Meanwhile, have a great time.